This week on The Futurists, Rob and Brett are back.
In the very near future, it's going to be agent-to-agent communication where no one's going to be using search. Humans won't be using search.
Yeah.
Agents will be doing all the discovery. They'll be doing all the processing. They'll be looking at, and this whole notion of search optimization and creating these, link farms.
It's all gone. It's all gone.
All going to go away. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek with my buddy, co-host, Brett King. Brett, hi. Great to connect with you again.
Man. Yeah, it's been...
Trotter.
I was in Cannes for the film festival. It's like when this goes to air, it's going to be a week after. But and then I had two events on the same day, one virtual and one on stage, and I had to literally get off stage and had 4 minutes to get into my hotel room to do the second event. And then immediately after that, got on a plane and came here to UAE, where I opened the keynote for the Government Digital Readiness Retreat this morning. So It's been a pretty wild few days, my friend.
Intense. I know. I get your dispatches when you're going from place to place, and so I kind of feel like I'm vicariously traveling along with you. Hey, tell me about some insights from the UAE. So you've been spending quite a bit of time in Dubai and in the region. So tell me what's happening there.
So I'm actually working with the Prime Minister's office as a futurist, resident futurist, which is pretty cool. I've actually thought about this. If there were three, let's say the top three governments in the world that a futurist would be welcome to today, my guess is it would probably be China, number one, although I don't have the language competency for that, but, some of our Chinese futurist friends might. Then I would say UAE and Saudi are definitely right up there. We had a delegation from Singapore at this event today, and they used to host people from the UAE in Singapore all the time. Now it's the opposite. Now Singaporeans are coming to the UAE to learn about future readiness. And there was a hearing not that long ago where a representative of the US government was talking about how the US should be able to do what Abu Dhabi can do in terms of immigration handling at the airport and stuff like that. But it's really interesting to see the sort of future readiness culture that is appearing here, the embracing of this. There's no defensiveness of traditional incumbent sectors. It's all there's this culture of embracing change. So it's a pretty interesting environment to come into now because, as a futurist, I find this is pushing me even harder to be on my game and to be researching, the latest trends and developments and things like that. But did you see the news about OpenAI's big data center they're launching in the UAE?
So OpenAI has been generating a lot of news. Tell us what's happening in the UAE. Give us the update from the Emirates.
So they just signed a deal to launch a major data center, AI data center in the UAE. And it's the largest data center. It's going to be, they say it's, I can't remember the geography but that they compare it to, but it's a 5 gigawatt data center. So This is really interesting, is now we're measuring data centers by the amount of electricity they consume. So it's a 5 gigawatt data center. It's going to cost $100 billion, but bringing in $40 billion annually. It's a pretty big deal.
Any insight on whether that'll be powered by renewable energy? They probably haven't disclosed that yet, but it's kind of a neat concept to think of taking the radiant energy of the sun and converting it into intelligence. If that's a possibility, that would be kind of charming. Otherwise, there's no shortage of fossil fuels in that region, so they can certainly burn some fossils to run that data center.
There is generally a view right now in terms of the sort of energy transformation here
Hmm.
that is going to have to be major investment in solar and alternative generation to support these sorts of efforts more broadly. Because this is not the only thing that's happening on in the UAE in terms of power demands. Of course, there's a massive increase for electric vehicles here. We're talking about a lot of new energy demands in terms of transportation and so forth around this, increasing the metro. There's a new airport coming in, so there's a lot of activity here
Hmm.
that's going to require new energy infrastructure. There is a general acceptance this has got to be net new energy infrastructure that's going to be based on renewable tech. There's no major next gen nuclear here that for baseload that I've seen as yet, but of course they are involved in investing in some sort of fusion projects, so that could come into that. And they are invested also in the Chinese efforts for the SMRs, the small nuclear reactors, and the thorium stuff that's going on there, the molten salt thorium reactors.
Two interesting things you brought up there. The first one is in a way these countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but actually all the countries in that region are kind of neutral. They work with the West, they work with China, they're open. They seem to be open to anyone, and of course they're propelled. They have a mission, right? They're on a mission because they know that fossil fuel is going to come to an end at some point, and they have to migrate their entire economy to something else. They can't be entirely dependent on fossil fuel. The other thing that is worth mentioning here, I think, the thing I noticed when I was visiting Dubai and Jordan and Oman in the last year is these are countries that are not afraid to make a 50-year investment. They're really future focused in the sense that they'll place a bet on infrastructure that is for 50 years in the future. And the evidence of that is the existence of Dubai as a city. Dubai was a little fishing town. It was a village. Now it's this gigantic, thriving metropolis with a huge port. All those decisions were made in the 1970s and 80s. The investment came, they structured the economy, they created incentives and so forth, and attracted the investment. Do you think that's similar to what's happening now? Is that a good analogy for what they're doing with data centers?
I think so, but I also think that you do have, if you are trying to do investment in AI, you have some very large, sovereign wealth funds in the region that are very, very interested in investing in this. So there's a lot of, foreign investment going into AI projects. You have generally, from a regulatory perspective, very friendly regulations towards this. Obviously, there is more work being done on alignment here. But this is, I guess, the benefit of the UAE in particular, even more so than Saudi, where they have been fairly politically neutral. Switzerland of the Gulf region, and they do have very good relationships with the Chinese. They have very good relationships with the Europeans. They have good relationships with the US, with India. They have a lot of Indian companies in here. They're not far from India. It's only a few hours from here. So when you look sort of geopolitically, they've got quite a good platform here for sort of geopolitical stability in terms of policy, and generally for investment both into the region and investment coming out from Abu Dhabi and the sovereign wealth funds into other regions, which of course creates stronger geopolitical relationships as well.
To some extent, this reminds me of the old phrase from 10 years ago: "Data is the new oil." Here you have
Yeah.
the oil countries, the oil nations, and they're investing in data centers. So, like, here,
Yeah,
it's a literal
it's funny.
manifestation of that slogan. How
I would.
critical do you think data centers are going to be as a value control point for AI? Is this viewed as, like, if you want to be in the AI game, you've got to have a massive Stargate style data center, or you can't even compete?
Look, there is obviously with DeepSeek and other technologies some compression going on in terms of the models, which could, reduce the compute load for AI over time. But with the amount of AI that they're looking to deploy in the UAE, we're looking to deploy this for the purpose of government, for smart city resource management. So you're looking at transportation systems, sanitation, power management, water management, and so forth, supply chain, looking at the healthcare, reinventing the healthcare system, the digital twin model, which of course we've talked about a lot, plus general AI infrastructure. So I do think you need to start thinking about data centers as you would electricity generation or, water treatment plans. I think it's just core infrastructure for
or
sort of
even
this next phase.
transportation. Even like
Yeah.
transportation and supply chain links. It's essentially a key part of the digital supply chain.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
need a data center just like you need a gigantic port if you want to be in the game.
Well, this is really interesting. I mean, we've talked about this
Hmm.
before, but UAE is implementing Chinese tech in the ports here for automation as well. And we know that China now has 80% of their ports, shipping ports, that is automated, fully automated. There are
Yeah.
ports in China that are completely 100% automated. And if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative over the last 10 years, what have they been building? They've been building ports in Africa and, in Southeast Asia and so forth. And those are obvious targets for this type of level of automation as well. So,
Hmm.
if you're talking about AI-based infrastructure, we often think about, what it takes to run these large LLMs, open AI data centers for semantic or generative AI. But from an industrial AI perspective, that's quite a different level of investment. You're really
That's right.
talking about large scale autonomy in the economy, which requires many disparate, technological advances and changes, but
Yeah.
it does still require its core a data center infrastructure as well. So the power demands for that are going to go up as well.
So this, in a way, is a reinforcement of their current position. I think when people think about the Middle East and UAE, they sometimes miss the fact that one of the largest container ports in the world is in Dubai, and it's actually
Yeah.
one of the reasons why Dubai is so successful. The port, I think it's called Abu Jazel. It's managed by DP World, Dubai Ports International, and that's a major supply chain link to Africa as well. So if you're shipping goods, say from Eastern Asia or China to Africa, you're most likely to pass through the port in Dubai. And what you're saying now is that the data requirements for automating that, you can imagine almost like the container ports are switching packets the same way a network switch packets. The packets on a container are the containers, those 20-foot standard container units that are on the ships. Those get switched by AI just the same way a packet on a network might get switched. It's at least a reasonable metaphor. But
Yeah.
they're literally building out the data center. They were kind of literalizing that metaphor by merging the two things, a data center and a gigantic container port. This is an interesting notion only in the sense that in the United States, we're so far behind. Here in the United States, the folks who don't travel, who don't get a chance to go visit these places, and when they do travel, don't necessarily do it for business purposes, so they don't see this perspective that you see. What they might be missing is that our container ports here are still largely manual labor.
Manually
They
operate.
require
Yeah, yeah.
tens of thousands of workers at the dock. And of course, right now they're all freaking out. Here at the Port of LA, Port of LA and Long Beach can manage about 30% of the goods coming into the United States, and most of the goods coming from Asia. And those two ports are nearly idle at this point because of these silly tariffs that have been imposed. So we've got layoffs and tens of thousands of workers whose jobs are in jeopardy at our ports. Meanwhile, the Chinese have been focused on automating the ports, something that has been on the drawing board for more than 10 years. But during the pandemic, they really took the lead in doing this. They had
Yeah.
to. They had no choice because they had to keep goods flowing. So they automated their ports. Here, in the U.S., our unions are fighting that, and they've made it very difficult for ports to automate, even partially. And we're nowhere near a fully automated port system. And so, Brett, do Americans need to be concerned? Like, should we feel like we're falling behind in the AI
Oh,
race,
yeah.
the automation race, and the global supply chain race? Do you think that these are places where Americans are falling behind?
So 12 trillion US dollars worth of goods go through the Jebel Ali port, as you said. That's 1.83 billion metric tons every year. And over the next 5 years, they predict that they'll get to 80% automation in that port. So that's the reality of what's happening in on the ground in the UAE. But as you've rightly pointed out, and as we've talked about before, the dock workers strike that occurred, that tail end of the Biden administration, one of the key, concessions that were made for the dock workers was an agreement to not automate the ports for another 20 years. How is it possible for the US to compete with China on the Belt and Road with infrastructure without that level of automation in that core infrastructure? It's not just about giving the humans the jobs on the docks. It's about the level of efficiency and the amount of cargo that can go through those ports in an autonomous supply chain scenario. And China, obviously, let's look at electric vehicles. They can now produce an electric vehicle, a new electric vehicle in these dark factories in China every 55 seconds. Right. And if you're going to be producing that volume of new vehicles, and of course, BYD just had their results for Q1 for Europe, and they're outselling Tesla, and that's just one of the EV manufacturers. But imagine that volume of vehicles going through ports where it's still human operated. You would have a bottleneck, of course.
Yep.
So that's really, I think this comes back to what we've discussed many times about limits to growth and so forth when you have this level of automation and the way it can go. But if you want to reduce the cost of goods, if you want to be super competitive, automation is going to be an absolute key element of it. If the US does want to onshore production facilities, they're going to have to go with robotic, dark factories.
Right.
Otherwise, it won't be competitive from day one. The labor cost alone would make it uncompetitive. And if you're going to have automated factories, you need to have automated transportation, supply chain, and automated shipping to round that out. I mean, that would seem fairly logical. So, the US has some problems with that. And the tariffs won't fix that, right?
No, there's a fiction here, this sort of fallacy in the United States, particularly in the manufacturing states like Michigan and the Midwest, where the tariffs are somehow going to magically revitalize American manufacturing. And this is just not true. This is just not the case. First of all, the tariffs are going to make it more expensive because we're going to have to pay more for raw material coming into the country. We don't have all the resources here. But secondly, all we'd be doing is protecting a very bloated and inefficient production facility that can't compete on a global level. So we might build a tariff wall around the country, and that might mean that Americans buy less good, inferior goods that are more expensive. That won't help us win. And in the long haul, the jobs won't stay here. Even if we do create manufacturing jobs, as you point out, all of this is going to go to AI, dark factories, automation. And so, what the Chinese seem to be doing, and it looks to me like the folks in the Middle East are following this pattern. They're saying, okay, what's the future look like? Well, let's commit to that. Let's invest everything we've got in building out that future. Let's be the friendliest to the future of any country in the world and welcome all that innovation. And here in the United States, we seem to be going the opposite way. We're trying to turn back the tide, turn back the hands of time, and go back to some mythical point in the past where manufacturing was king and labor was the queen. And honestly, I just think that's a fiction. I do not see how tariffs get us there.
Well, on their own, they can't. I mean, that's key, and obviously we have had a deal done between China and the US since we started talking about the tariffs, but and there have been obviously
30%. I mean, they're still quite high, right?
Yeah.
The tariffs, so they're not gone. Like people think, oh, the tariffs are over. No, 30% is ridiculous. It's going to crush the earnings at Walmart, among other places.
And China is not necessarily hurting. They've in the midst of all of this. I don't know whether you saw, and I know we've got to go to a break any minute, but did you see the Brasilia-China trade deal that they did about a month and a half ago? So massive, and keep in mind, the BRICS economies, Brazil, India, and China are expected to be four of the top, in the top five economies of the world, within the next decade. And so Brazil and China did this massive trade deal, but the trade deal was to be done excluding US dollar trade. That was the basis of the deal. And we're talking, I can't remember the size of the deal right now, but specifically, circumventing the US dollar trading markets.
Yes, so that's resistance against the Americans' over-reliance on sanctions as a way to kind of discipline other countries or get them to conform with our wishes. We've been relying on sanctions now for 30 years to manipulate countries, and it's only natural that trading partners would say, gosh, maybe we don't want to subject all of our transactions to the US dollar and to the SWIFT banking system. They can build a system that works outside of that. It's no secret that China's been focused on trying to do that for some time. We'll watch that and we'll continue to report on it. Brazil always has had a strong relationship with China and the United States. Those are the top two trading partners for that country. And then none of this just the trade with the United States is going down, but tariffs are not going to help that at all. We're driving people into the embrace of other countries,
It's very true. And, China's obviously concerned about, if they do take action in Taiwan, for example, the potential for sanctions with US dollar. So what is the solution to that? Well, they've created an alternative to the SWIFT network. It's called CIPS. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's the cross-border interbank payment system. And this is, for transactions in Chinese yuan, and it is you can run the ECNY, the central bank digital currency on it as well. But this is specifically part of their strategy. So they've been selling US Treasury bills, buying up gold. They've got an alternative to the SWIFT network for payments, and they're starting to do major trade deals avoiding US dollar currency. They are clearly on a longer term strategy to reduce the risk of US dollar sanctions and US dollar banking system issues in the future.
On that sunny note, let's go to a break. Hang on, folks, because we're going to come back after 1 minute. Okay, we're back. It's the Futurists with Rob Tercek and Brett King, and we're talking about global trade. The big announcement in Dubai of building a world-class data center and how that might impact their ability to maintain the high levels of trade that they have and their seaport, the great number of containers going through their seaport. But what Brett just ended with before the break is this ominous notion, I think ominous from the U.S. standpoint, that China is building an alternative payment system and a trade system that would not be subject or not as easily subject to U.S. sanctions and control. So that's a strategic defense. Sometimes I wonder, Brett, if the United States thinks in 20-year terms the way the Chinese tend to, whether we have a vision for 25 years out. Often we ask our guests on the show, what's your vision for 25 years? And you've seen half the people have a vision, half of them don't, right? And I think countries are like that as well. Some countries have a 25-year vision. Clearly, Saudi Arabia, clearly the UAE have a vision. They know what they need to get done. They have to, transition off of oil. They want to be leaders in the information space. They're working hard to get there. They're making the investments. When you look at the United States, though, it's a little bit tricky for me to say exactly what the United States plan for 25 years out is, if there is one. And the same could be said for some European countries as well.
I mean, is it possible to do that in the US political environment? Because if you do start a 20-year plan, then what could happen is the next administration comes along and puts a bullet in it, right? So,
that's particularly now when it's hyperpolarized.
That's part of the problem, right?
Yep. On the other hand, let me offer a counterpoint here. So right now, the U.S. is considering the Genius Act, which would make stablecoins a regulated digital currency. And on the face of it, actually, it seems to make sense. Our previous administrations had banned crypto; they criminalized many of the activities and driven them offshore. And they had lawsuits against many crypto companies, our Securities and Exchange Commission. And we were treating cryptos like any other security, so they were relatively heavily taxed. And as a result, there was very little innovation happening onshore in the United States. It was happening elsewhere. The goal with the Genius Act is to re-onshore that and to do it specifically with regard to stablecoins. And of course, the stablecoins would have to be pegged to something, and the U.S. regulations would require it to be pegged to American assets, treasury bills or dollar assets. And so there's, a net effort here, I think, to establish the U.S. dollar as a kind of
I think
reserve.
that's great.
Well,
I mean, I think that's the only move if US is not going to do a central bank digital currency, which is sort of
That's exactly what I was
politically
thinking as well.
untenable, right?
If the U.S. isn't going to launch a digital dollar, then why not make this a haven for stablecoins and regulate them and make the dollar the default payment, the default security payment? I think it's an interesting notion. I don't know. We'll see how that fares. There's some resistance to it, but it looks like that bill is gathering steam in Congress right now. I know it's been debated lively in a lively way in Senate. And in a way, that might be the free market alternative to a central bank, the highly centralized approach that the Chinese have had.
Sure.
That would be a good contrast, I think, for the U.S. to do that. So we'll see. It freaks out some people because crypto's association with, frankly, the dark economy and the huge number of scams and scandals has cast a kind of, a pall of incredulity over the whole space. But that doesn't. If you focus on the scandals and the scams, you may not see the potential. And my thinking is that you're going to start to see automation We're going to require stable coins for machine.
You can't run these smart contracts on fiat currency. You can't run these smart contracts on core banking systems, right? It's why players like Stripe look so good right now. I don't know whether you saw the news last week, but was it last week or the week before? Stripe announced a stable coin current account, right, in 100 countries overnight.
Oh, wow.
And they have a really cool smart contracting marketplace that they've built. So, JP Morgan Chase is working on, some stablecoin stuff for trade finance. HSBC has, but no one in the traditional banking system has created a stablecoin marketplace like this for smart contracts because it was seen as crypto and DeFi, and there wasn't supporting regulation for that. Now that there has to be supporting regulation for stable coins in order to do autonomous business stuff, because we're not going to do CBDCs, then, you've got players like Stripe were 1 foot in the DeFi world and 1 foot in the TradFi world, are now looking like next generation core infrastructure for financial services. And, let's think about the US banking system right now. Most of bank-to-bank commerce in the US, bank-to-bank payments are still done on the ACH system, the automated clearing house, but it's not real time. That's why we had the FedNow initiative, which is the real-time initiative. Only about 10% of the banks in the US are on FedNow today. You go to Brazil, or you go to India, or you go to China, and 100% of the banks are on real-time payments rails. And so, if you want to do autonomous business, you need tokenized or digital currency or a CBDC, and you need real-time payment rails, and you need regulation that is, defined in terms of sort of digital currency. And so, the US, has to get on board with that pretty quickly, as does Europe. But Europe is working on launching the digital euro in 2027. So they at least have a plan for that. But stable coins would appear to be probably more of the model for the Western economies. The only issue with that is we may see that CBDCs are, better sort of structured in terms of cross-border trade because they can be configured to work with trade agreements, whereas stable coins are going to be like the US dollar, sort of an accepted currency that's independent of that, but it won't have as much configurability or programmability. But that's just in terms of sort of the way we structure the instruction set and things like that. It'll be interesting to see what an economy like the UAE and Saudi does with that. Are they going to go to stable coins? What does OPEC do? What's OPEC going to do in terms of trading oil on an autonomous basis? Are they going to go for stable coins? Is Saudi going to push their own, digital currency? It'd be interesting to sort of see how that develops as well.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. What this all seems like to me is a merging between the digital world and the physical world. It's a topic we've visited from time to time on the show. But in any case, it seems like it's converging and happening faster. The key takeaway for me from this conversation is Americans need to travel more. We need to get out more and see how other countries are doing it. Yeah, there was a time where if you wanted to see the future, you came to the U.S., but that time was in the 1990s. I haven't felt that way for a long time. Even when mobile first started to take off, at the time I was working at Sony, and I would go to Japan pretty frequently, and I'd be like, wow, this is like a trip to the future. You could see the mobile internet taking shape month by month in Japan in the late 1990s when it wasn't even a thing in the Western world. It wasn't even on the radar, really. It was coming, but it hadn't dawned yet. Since that time, what I've seen is a kind of decoupling where the United States doubles down on the past. We have this great luxury because we have good transaction infrastructure. We have good in-the-ground digital infrastructure. We have good telecommunications infrastructure and so on. And we're kind of letting it coast. We're kind of coasting on the investments of the past. And back to the point I made earlier, what I noticed in the Middle East is that these are nations where the leadership says, okay, we had that investment in the past and that got us to where we are now. And to go the next stage in the future, we need to do another round of massive infrastructure investment and reposition or recalibrate the entire economy towards a vision that we see 25 or 50 years out. And that is what the first emirs did in the Gulf countries in the 1970s. A young generation of leaders emerged, and they started making these long-term investments, really long-term bets that totally transformed those economies. And it seems to me like they're willing to do that again. Now, I don't want to bash the United States here. That's not my mission. Of course, the United States is doing Stargate. We're investing in large data centers. Of course, we've got leadership in AI, at least for the moment. But even there, the United States flavor of artificial intelligence is proprietary and closed. It's owned. It's top down. It's highly centralized. And all those words sort of have the odor of the past versus the Chinese approach, which is open, open source. It's less regulated. It's, kind of the Wild West in the East, if you will. And that feels a little bit more future forward to me. I can imagine a time where a company like OpenAI or maybe a company like Runway ML, I think there's going to be a time where they get squished, they get sandwiched between these gigantic technology companies, Microsoft and Google, and then the open source, which is increasing in capability, and they're going to get squished in the middle. And now, OpenAI just did another announcement yesterday of a huge acquisition of a non-existing company. I found this very interesting.
6.5 billion, right?
6.5 billion for JONY IVE's startup company IO. And this is a company he started with Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. So this has been a relationship since the inception of that company. The question is, the company hasn't produced anything yet. They have prototypes, and they just got acquired for 6.5 billion. And they didn't even get JONY IVE full time for that. He'll be working there, but he also keeps his design studio. And so it's kind of confusing to me to understand what exactly OpenAI got for 6.5 billion. Any insight there?
Do you think it's a consumer product, or it would have to be, right? It'd have to be some sort of consumer tech that represents, connectivity with AI in some way. Is it the next generation of smart speaker, that you're going to have in your home or something like that? I mean, I could see something like that. I don't know how long it's going to be before we find out what the tech is. Presumably, it's going to be some time.
Yeah.
But JONY IVE is obviously a consumer electronics wizard. One of the best designers, that we've had in modern history of that sort of stuff. The
failure of Apple to conceive of a new form factor that succeeds the iPhone, right? They had this great gigantic win in the iPhone. They've been milking that for 15 years. No question, that was an incredible achievement. But they haven't really figured out.
What have they done with AI? Yeah.
Very little. And JONY IVE is responsible largely for the success of the iPhone, right? He at least had played a big role in the design of that hardware. and making it so iconic. So now the banking on the idea that this will be the successor to the iPhone or the successor to the smartphone. Now that's an interesting thing, right? Because if you think about the smartphone, it was a convergence of three different things. It was a media player, like an MP3 player at the time. It was also a phone, and it was also a kind of a computing device in your pocket. And at the time, that was revolutionary. That was back in 2007. That was revolutionary. So I guess the question here would be, what different kinds of compute are going to converge into a single device this time around? Perhaps that's what Johnny Ive knows. Maybe he's got insight into what computing trends are going to be able to be done on a single device in a converged format. I'll be curious to see. The big question for me is, what kind of screen will this thing have? We now spend
So
about 9
yeah, I
hours a
mean,
day looking at screens.
in terms of the timing, they are set to launch a device in 2026, and I've said the AI hardware. Like he was critical of the Humane Pin and the Rabbit R1 as very poor products, which of course they flopped. He is saying that it is going to be a totally new kind of thing that is, it's not necessarily going to replace the smartphone or the laptop, but it is seen as a new type of technology to insert to your daily routine, I guess, right?
Yeah, the great thing that the phone gave us, the smartphone gave us mobility, right? So that unlocked the ability to have your computer with you everywhere. No matter where you are, whatever circumstance you're in, there's an app for it. I'm wondering, what new thing will this device enable? And it's obviously going to be about networked intelligence of some sort and having the answers ready. Now, along with this, Brett, there's another development that came out this week with Google. Google made a series of announcements, very impressive suite of products yesterday, the new version of VO 3.
Oh, yeah, it was amazing. I watched some of it, like the real-time translation and, the smart glasses, the Android XR tech. We've been seeing some progress with Meta on the smart glasses with the Ray-Ban and stuff, but Android XR and what Samsung is doing is looking pretty impressive. I don't think what IO's doing is smart glasses. The reason being is that if you read the quote from Sam Altman, this is what Sam said. Johnny recently gave me one of his prototypes of the device for the first time to take home, and I've been able to live with it, and I think it's the coolest piece of technology the world will have ever seen. So It sounds to me like something designed for being in the home.
Wow. Fascinating. Now, the part of the news from Google that was quite interesting, in my view, apart from the video models that were amazing eye candy, is that they have started to transform search. So Google has they've erected this incredible business for the last 25 years on search plus advertising. And of course, they're under assault from every angle, every conceivable angle, antitrust cases in just about every region in the world, trying to break apart that combination. But this is the largest category of computing in the world, and it's a $250 billion business. So this is a gigantic business. And what Google showed yesterday is a new kind of search, basically their successor to the Google search page, which
they had to do.
Right, they had no choice.
Because
You're right.
chat and other AI, Claude,
Perplexity, they're all fizzling away.
Is killing Google search. I saw some
10% of people don't use search now; they use AI, right? And that number's growing every month. So Google had to do this, but immediately, just yesterday, Google was sued. So of course, the past rears its ugly head. The News Media Alliance filed a lawsuit saying that Google takes content without permission and is reformatting it into this new AI search result product. I mean, it's actually quite true. Like, that's an accurate assessment. So we're going to find out what happens, but this is not unusual when a company innovates. Now some voice from the past is going to come in and say, hang on a second.
But if you tie this in with the agentic stuff, even just what MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal announced a few weeks ago with, Agent Pay with MasterCard and so forth, we are looking at a new era of sort of active shopping and commerce based on AI. So
Yes.
you want to search for something and you go, oh, that's cool, buy that. That's all you'll need to do, right? You're like, this is sort of the next level of one click that Amazon developed. Is now you won't even have to go to the site and
You
look at,
won't.
oh, that's what I want. Just
Yeah.
execute on that for me, AI.
Your agent will bring you things,
Yeah.
and in a way, you're already getting that from
Free flight.
Amazon.
Yeah.
I get an email every day from Amazon saying we found some things that you might like, and that's a very primitive version of what you're describing. But basically, there's an active intelligence on the network that's doing all the searching and processing, and it's just bringing you results, and those results will get better and better over time. Now, who controls that agent is a great question, because that's clearly going to be a value control point. Is it working for you, or is it something that you hire, or is it somebody else's platform? Is it the Amazon agent that you have? Is it the Google agent that you have? Or is it Brett King's agent? And the second thing is that this is going to reconfigure the web completely. Our guest, a frequent guest on our show, is Shelley Palmer, and he wrote a piece this morning. He said that this battle between OpenAI, between Google and the News Media Alliance, it's really a battle about the past. It's about how we used to find information. And he said what it misses is the point is that in the very near future, it's going to be agent to agent communication where no one's going to be using search. Humans won't be using search.
Yeah.
Agents will be doing all the discovery. They'll be doing all the processing. They'll be looking at, and this whole notion of search optimization and creating these, link farms.
It's all gone. It's all gone.
All going to go away.
And how do you market to an agent? Right? We had this conversation on the show a couple of weeks ago with Dave Birch when we were talking about agentic payments. It's like, how do you convince an agent to use your credit card? Credit card reward points and airline miles won't cut it anymore. It's like, so a lot of the traditional marketing structures that we've built, advertising structures we've built, they're all about to be pretty much obliterated by this sort of agentic space. And it could happen very quickly, much quicker than Google search sort of changed our habits and behavior. I mean, this could happen within the space of a couple of years.
And you can see it happening already. Like certain companies have committed this year to be fully AI centric, and they're trying to reorganize their business with AI at the core. I'm working on such a venture myself right now. But in other parts of the economy, it hasn't really hit yet. And actually still to this day, about half of Americans don't know what ChatGPT is. They haven't used it. So while there's a growing number of people who do use it, there's also a very large, significant group of people who are late to the party. And so I guess the point there is, just like we've talked about in the first half of the show, where innovation happens in different parts of the world, it also happens in different parts of the economy, and it might be invisible to people who it hasn't hit yet.
For sure.
They're in for a real surprise.
There are two types of people in the world. You've heard me say this before, right? Those who are using AI to enhance their career or enhance their business, to give themselves an advantage. That's the first class of people. And the second, and those are going to be replaced by the first. At least that's what it looks like right now, because there's going to be so many advantages to integrating AI into your daily life and your career and your business that it is sort of like that inflection point where the internet came along and created e-commerce. And, there were people going, I'm never going to go to a website to buy stuff. I'm happy using the yellow pages. And it's that same sort of pattern of behavior all over again. But because AI has that exponential improvement, right? 10x every 2 years right now in terms of, improvement in, cognition and compression, the ability of that to really accelerate exponentially from a commercial aspect is insane. And that's why, these companies are putting trillions of dollars into this architecture.
They see it as a winner-take-all race, and they know whoever emerges as the leading provider is going to be in a dominant position because of network effects. At least that's the prevailing theory on the West Coast. We shall see. I mean, there's a powerful alternative to this in open source. And we may find that there'll be ways for people to integrate AI into their sites. There's just an open source project released by Microsoft this week that would enable anyone to integrate a small model into their website. I think what we're taking away from this part of the conversation is that anyone who's listening, anyone who's offering any kind of service or product on the web right now needs to be thinking about Agentic-AI and making your site optimized for AI interaction and discovery, because it might not be people coming to your site in the future. There may not be in the future. It might be your agent interacting with other agents.
Even today, when I was talking with the UAE folks from the government, I was saying, do you have an identity infrastructure for machines? do you have a KYA approach, right? Know your agent, know your machine. Because that's the next thing, is how do we ensure that these agents are operating within legal and regulatory infrastructure? And this is where it gets really interesting. When you can operate these agents in the cloud from anywhere in the world, how do you regulate this stuff in the United States when you've got Chinese agents operating on open source software that's in the cloud, which isn't housed in the US, but is targeting US consumers? This I don't know how you can regulate this individually.
And our Congress is trying to figure that out right now. They're trying to draft new legislation to control the dissemination of AI technologies, particularly to gate China. And it's like these guys, they can't even pass a tax bill, let alone regulate AI.
No, but this is what I think, where this takes us in a few years is we must have some sort of global AI regulation, Think of it like the WTO or the WHO. And obviously WHO's fallen out of favor with the US, with the current administration and things like that. But you are going to need consensus mechanism, particularly if you want to get alignment on this stuff. And that's, it's going to require some global standards. I think that's going to be the trickiest part of this. And I think it's going to be the wild, wild west for quite a while.
I think you're right. A turbulent forecast. It'll be interesting to see. I can't wait to see what Johnny Ive has come up with. So thanks for sharing that tidbit with us. Tantalizing news. Maybe we'll soon have an AI appliance in the home.
Look, when it is released, we definitely have to get Shelley on to talk about that. He'll have all the lowdown, so that'll be fantastic.
Good fun. Well, great seeing you, and welcome back to, I guess, your home base now in the UAE. Eager to get your next report from your travels. And folks, thanks for listening to The Futurists. This has been Brett King and myself, Rob Tercek. We love bringing this show to you, and we love the guests that we're getting. Lately, we've been having such good conversations. So we want to continue doing that. Please do let other people know about the show. If you don't mind, write a 5-star review if you enjoyed this show. That helps other people discover it. And of course, as always, we give a big shout out of thanks to our friends at Provoke Media, Elizabeth Severns, our producer, Kevin Hirschhorn, our engineer, and everybody at Provoke that makes the show possible. Thanks for listening. Let's keep it going. And Brett, I will see you at some point
in the future.